I get the pleasure of introducing Mr. Spencer and his friend Laurie Wallace. I recently learned that Ken graduated from the same high school and electronics program as Dwayne Zilm, Pete Treasure, and myself. So we have a wee bit in common. And as some of you know, Ken was the 7th employee of McDonald Detweiler and Associates, a company founded at UBC in 1969 when we were out there, founded by one of our esteemed profs, John A. McDonald, and it grew to be quite a successful company. So we're hoping that Ken will tell us a little bit about that. He worked for them for, I think it was about 7 years to become a vice president and general manager. But after he was persuaded to leave, he went on to co-found Creo, BC's first billion-dollar company, who were eventually bought out by Kodak. Ken is being interviewed by his friend and angel investor, Laurie Wallace, a University of Calgary computer science grad. So I'll turn it over to you and Ken and Laurie.
Thanks so much, guys. And as a point of reference, Ken was an investor and board member in my first company and was an important mentor to both me and my business partner in our successes. And we've become good friends and have traveled many parts of the world, from Antarctica to the north part of the European Arctic. We went as far as 80 degrees north latitude. So we've done lots of traveling together. And just starting it off, as you were completing your PhD at UBC back in 1970, you joined MDA, Donald Detweiler, as employee number 7. What was the attraction to work for McDonald Detweiler, a small, underfunded startup company, versus a much larger firm?
Well, I don't know if it was underfunded, but I mean, we just did contracts, so the contracts funded us. Well, at the time I was graduating, I had 2 offers, one with Bell Northern Research, which is gone now, in Ottawa, and one from MDA. And me and my then wife debated it because we thought, well, it might be nice to get out of BC. We spent all our life here. But in the end, I thought it'd be more exciting to work for a small company than a big research establishment. So I took the job at MDA, and all my life, all I wanted to do was design. And my grandmother said it started when I was 3 years old. So I joined as, a design engineer. And then things slowly changed. The company was growing fairly fast, 50 to 100% per year, which is easy when you got 7 people. But even when we had 30, 40 people, it was growing like that. And I eventually moved into project management because I found the challenges there just as good or greater than doing design. And eventually, in a downturn, when the then general manager left, whom I had great respect for, I was made vice president and general manager, which I did for 3 years. And then John and I decided it was time to move on.
So when exactly did you leave MDA, and I guess did you leave MDA?
I left MDA in 1980. Yeah, I started in 71. I was there 9 years. So I left in 80. And it's a long story, but I had all these ideas how to manage companies that were way out at the time. And I realized that nobody was going to let me experiment on their company. So I had to start my own company. And I was good friends with Dan Galbert. Maybe some of you have heard of him, who's a prolific inventor and a nice guy. And he once came and told me that I was the only manager who he ever had that enhanced his performance rather than retarded it. So we started Creo, just the 2 of us, and we didn't call Creos because that's Latin for I create, because we didn't have a clue what we were going to do. We just knew we wanted to start a company.
So why was people know Dan Galbert? We know he's a smart guy, but why was he a good partner? And how did you split responsibilities, given that you guys both came from the engineering domain?
Well, it was easy. I mean, I also haven't got an MBA along the way. So I did the business side and he did the tech side. So I wasn't that, even though I had an engineering PhD, I wasn't that involved on the tech side. I was on the management side. So I raised the money and I ran the projects, and he did all the inventing and ran the tech teams.
So did you stay involved in engineering, or were you pretty much operations, finance?
I did not stay involved. I mean, I knew what was going on, but no, I wasn't involved in the engineering side.
Now, Creo started as an optical tape recording company, and then you moved into the laser imaging engines for printers. Now, clearly it was the right decision, but why did you make this shift?
Well, at the time, it's hard to believe now, but the way to do bulk storage was a magnetic tape, which stored 5,000 megabytes. I might have that right. And optical tape would store a terabyte. And so we decided that was the way of the future, not knowing what was going to happen to the magnetic side, because Dan was convinced you could never do that kind of density on magnetic disks or so on. Turns out people found a way. So we got, we were selling the optical tape recorder, but as I always say, we weren't selling enough of them to meet our ego expectations. So we took 5 years to develop all the technology. We started, there was no optical tape, there was no way to write it, there was no way to read it. And, but the same technology could be applied in the printing industry. So we switched to the printing industry, partly because we had a customer who gave us $12 million for 20 machines, and they gave us the $12 million up front before we started the R&D.
So a couple of questions, like, did you keep both entities going at the same time, or did you completely leave the optical market and go entirely into the laser printing?
No, we ran them both for the same time, and then a buyer came along and bought the optical tape business.
So you sold it and took that money and funded it back to the company?
Yeah.
No, one of the things that Creo did, from what I understand, is that you guys didn't have to raise an inordinate amount of capital, that you were able to not self-fund it, but some process pushed back into the company, and then this selling of the optical recorder. If you don't mind asking, how much money did you actually raise as while you were a private entity?
Well, the way it worked for the first, let's see, when did we start? For the first 8 years, we had two teams. One which was doing consulting work, something like Datum, Laurie's company, and one was doing our own product development, and one funded the other. Once we went into production, we always had, which was big money at the time, always had more than $1 million in the bank. Once we went into production, I got nervous if something went wrong, so we decided to take some venture capital about 8 years in. And we never needed it for years and years, but it was there as a cushion.
So was it tough to make, like, for your ego in some respects, to start in one market and say, we're going to abandon this market, almost like admit to the fact that this wasn't the panacea and the big opportunity, there's a better market? Sometimes people are so hell-bent on their decision, they don't want to change their decision because their ego gets in the way. Was that a problem?
No, it wasn't a problem. Both Dan and I were very practical and didn't have our egos involved in our decisions.
So if the IP was involved with the OTR and you sold it, how did you cross-license the intellectual property to keep it the core component for the laser engine?
Yeah, Dan still had the key patents, and when we sold the optical tape recorder, we still had the rights to we gave them the rights to the patent because we still owned them.
So how many patents does Dan have?
The number 25 comes to my mind, but that might be another friend of mine. About that number. I always said, that he was a prolific inventor. He could walk across the street and invent a new curb. But his real strength was when he was a kid, 12 years old, he lived in Israel, and they were very poor. So, and he had an extreme interest in precision mechanics. So he built in the kitchen a little machine shop, and he built all the machines by hand. And they all folded up and went away. And for some reason, which he's never fully explained, when he went to university, he took electrical engineering because he said all his friends were doing that. And then at MDA, when we need an optics engineer, there weren't any around BC, so he got out the books and learned optics. So he had precision mechanics, electrical, and optics, and he could make trade-offs. Well, we'll do this, with electric. We'll do this mechanically and optically, and correct it with electronics that other companies have to have committees for. So he could just do all that because he was prolific in all three disciplines.
Now, one thing I know, this is kind of core to your heart, and around town you see all these people who are from Creo. There's Creo people starting numbers of companies and having a lot of success, and there was so many people there that they've gone on to much. And I know many of the Creo individuals, and the one thing you hear all the time, there's that term, the Creo culture, the Creo management style. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what was that Creo culture and management, and what problem were you trying to solve? Like, what makes it unique or what makes it special?
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to do. And it's based around empowerment. So everybody was empowered to make decisions. We had no middle management. And the best story is anybody in the company could write a purchase order for any amount of money to buy something. There was a couple of hooks in that. One was they had to show to themselves there was payback, which isn't quite the right answer, present value is, but payback's easier for employees to calculate. And the second one, they had to check with the people affected by that decision. And the third one was, if I owned this company 100%, would I spend this money? So the catch in it was, if they're going to spend a lot of money, they had to consult me because I was affected. But so that's just one example of the empowerment that people had. They could do the right thing. It reminds me of, you guys maybe have heard of Ken Olsen because you're having your 50th anniversary, who founded DEC Computers. And his motto was, no matter what the customer says, no matter what your boss says, do the right thing. And that was Ken Olsen's mantra. So it was somewhat like that with us. So yeah, so the culture really caught on. And people loved it because, one way to motivate people was all about motivation and efficiency, but people are really motivated if you trust them. And I always said, if you treat people like kids, they react like kids. If you treat them like adults, they react like adults. So it was, you could go there at midnight and people still be working. Everybody was, and I see people now saying, I'm just working with a couple of former Creo people on a project now, and it was the best time of their life was being in that environment where everybody worked hard. And it showed up in the fact that nobody quit to go to another company in the first 10 years. I mean, quite a few people left because we had high standards, so we would ease them out. And one went and started a bed and breakfast, and one moved to Kelowna, but there was like a handful left, but none just to go to another company. And then in about the 10th year, and we did all our production locally. I haven't talked about the imaging device, but they were huge, made out of sheet metal. Everything was done locally. Anyway, so this woman in production quit to go back to the company she came from. Dan went nuts. And she said, well, my friends are pressuring me and offered me a bit more. And Dan pointed out to her that with profit sharing, she was actually making more at Creo, but she went And 3 months later, she came back. So, and one thing I missed in the motivation aspect, and in if you own this company, would you spend this money, is everybody had shares in the company. I didn't and still don't believe in options. I believe in shares because people with shares feel like owners, and people with options are, that's nice if the company goes up in value. But anyway, so I'm a big fan of shares versus options. And we put aside 20% of the shares when Dan and I started the company, so much for us, so much for investors, and 20% for employees, which just wasn't done at the time. We were the first company that gave out shares. And the number of shares you got was a nonlinear process. So we rated everybody maybe from 1 to 10, well, not 1. And so anybody below 5, we sort of eased them out. Anybody between 5 and 7, we put them on what's called the management. I made these words up. Management to performance. So they were told they had to do this, this, and this by this date, or it's not going to work out. And then the others, 8 to 10, were the stars. And you know that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. So when it came time to give out shares at the end of the year, a 7 got so many shares, an 8 got double 7, a 9 got double 8, and a 10 got double 9. So it was, we really rewarded the people, the real producers, quite highly. And when we sold the company, I can't remember how many millionaires there were. Again, that's a long time ago. Millionaire was a big deal, but there was a lot of millionaires of the stars.
So Ken, did new employees welcome this management style, this Creole culture, or did you find you had to kind of morph them into a different mindset of thinking? Like, was that transition difficult, or did you find that people warmly embraced it?
They warmly embraced it, and it was their peers that taught them about it, except for one guy. At one point, I decided we didn't have a decision-making model. How do we want to make decisions at Creo? There was about 80 people there then, and we did this exercise where we had lunch hour seminars, and I broke them into groups, and we talked about the 4 ways to make decisions, autocratic, democratic, consultative. Somebody asks everybody opinion and makes a decision, and consensus, which should have to be, consensus doesn't mean everybody thinks it's the best decision, but it's everybody thinks they can live with it. So I might think my decision's better, but I can live with yours. And if you say that, you're part of the consensus. So then they broke into groups, and they were to meet at lunch hour and come back with, well, how do we want to make decisions? And I should have had a slide for this. Anyways, at one point, this machinist got up and said, it's Ken's job to make decision and my job to make the parts, and stormed out. But he eventually left. He wasn't one of our stars. So, but that's the only one I ever got any pushback on.
Now, you hired, after you guys left McDonald Detweiler, a lot of your employees came from McDonald Detweiler. Was that a stressful process where you're seeing a company that you were part of and that people were trying to migrate into your organization at Creo?
No. I mean, we didn't actively recruit. They just knew us and they kept applying. And at one point, they had the electric optics division where most of our employees came from, and Alex Klopfer, who Laurie knows, was running at the time. And I said, Laurie, we feel kind of bad, hiring all these stars, but they keep applying and phoning us. And he had the maturity to say, that's not your problem, that's our problem. We've got to make it as attractive as Creo. So that was kind of our attitude. If they were managing the company well, they wouldn't be applying at Creo. But both Dan and I had great reputations, and so a Yeah, in the first 8 years, about half the people came from MDA. Well, eventually they closed down that division, so they all wanted to come at that point.
Now, you and Dan opted to bring a fellow named Amos Michelson, and he was an Israeli, I guess someone Dan had known or you guys had done some business with. And not only did you ask him to join the company, but you said to him you'd like him to become a partner in your organization. Now,
well, it wasn't all at once. First of all, Dan didn't know Amos from Israel.
Okay.
Amos was a customer of ours. When we were just making engines for imaging film in the printing industry, maybe I should go through what we did in the printing industry. Anyways, and he was a real deal maker, and he was always going for the win-win. And so he wasn't trying to squeeze us too hard. He wanted to make sure we'd win and they would win. And I said to Dan at the time, someday we got to hire a guy like that. Well, I almost quit that company because it was kind of a disaster. So we hired him to come, and his job was to find a new business for the technology we had. And that's how we slowly got into the printing industry. And then a couple of years later, we thought, well, you know, Dan and I gave unheard of again. We sold him some of our shares to make them equal at the price we thought they were worth when he came. So then he turned out to be a great CEO, allowing me to retire at age 51 because I knew he would do a better job than me. No ego there. I'd make more money if Amos was running it than if I was running it. So, and I'd have more fun if he was running it than if I was running it. And I am a believer that CEOs should turn over about every 10 years. They've tried everything. Some things worked, some things didn't. And when you hear yourself saying, oh, we tried that a few years ago and it didn't work, then it's time to move on because things have changed and you shouldn't be. So I left and he became CEO for 10 years. And we were in the process of recruiting a new CEO when Kodak came with their offer. So yeah, I think 10 years is about the shelf life of a CEO, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, back to bringing in Amos, like, you know, most founders are, you know, want to hold tight to their company. So it's kind of unheard of to say, you know, we're a successful business because your company was growing. It was you know, profitable, or at least it was doing well. And
it was profitable every year.
Oh, you were.
Some way or other.
And so, you know, to bring in a new person and say, not only are we going to bring you into but we want to give you equity position to become a partnership. You know, it said a lot to Amos and the fact that you guys put your ego aside.
Yeah, well, it's practical. As I said, and I knew I'd make more money.
Yeah. So was Amos a believer in the Creole culture? Like I know Amos personally as well. And, you know, he talks about the Creole culture and he identifies with that. Did he bring some facets to it that you didn't have, or did he become indoctrinated?
Well, he bought into it right away. What Amos brought was more rigor to economic thinking. So he would run noon-hour seminars about economic thinking, microeconomics, and so on. And I sort of did that, but he brought rigor to that. He didn't change the culture at all.
And what was your revenue? Like we'll talk about going public and things like that. But prior to going public, what was the revenue of Creo?
Well, at one point we said I was on the board then, but I wasn't running it. And we said we were $1 billion company because one quarter we did over 250 million, but we never did actually have a calendar year where we did $1 billion, but we were close to $1 billion.
Billion in revenues. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was, I guess it's a two-pronged question. What was the decision? Why'd you go public, first of all? And then at that point, is that the point you said, I'm stepping down as the CEO and passing the reins to Amos when you made the decision to go public?
No, well, that was the idea. We thought we would we can publish in 2 years. So I thought it was time to make the change 2 years ahead. But then the market wasn't good, so 95. I was still on the board, but I left the job as CEO in 95 and went public in 99. So it was 4 years before we went public. But the plan was 2 years.
Why go public?
Well, when we were growing really fast and doing, 250 million a quarter, you needed investors. And investors eventually want to get their money out. And employees. I mean, some had been there a long time. They had a lot of shares. They still had mortgages. So they were keen. We needed a liquidity event. And we weren't ready to sell it. So that came in 2005. So yeah, it was to keep them, it was the investor, I won't say driven request and employee request. And myself, I was retired and I had managed to sell a few shares to some investor, but, I wanted to get, I wanted to travel more and so on. So I was happy to go public and I could sell my shares slowly if I wanted to.
And then the company was purchased by Kodak. And I appreciate if it's a public company that you don't have total control, but one was well received, and why would the company or shareholders say we want to be bought by Kodak? Was it simply a matter of they were paying you enough for premium on the shares?
Yeah. I mean, Kodak, the film business was dying. Well, let me talk about the printing industry for a minute. Okay,
sure.
So we developed the technology from the optical tape recorder, which could write very tiny dots. And the first product, and Amos and I found the printing industry, we looked at other things too, decided the printing industry was the way to go, even though it had attributes we didn't like it wasn't growing. But the thing about the printing industry at the time, there was two things happening. One, it was going open source. Up until we came along, if you bought, an imager from a company, you had to buy their computer terminal to run it, which they charged $100,000 for a $10,000 computer, and because they had the right plug on it to plug in. And so they wanted to go, the printing industry wanted to go open source, and they wanted to go digital. So that's an absolute opportunity for a small company, relatively small, to move in, because if you've read The Innovator's Dilemma, what do the big companies do? If they tank all their existing products, their revenues drop for a few years and so on. So we could move in. And we found this company, R.R. Donnelly and Sons, with a vice president who's still a friend of mine. We traveled together. They decided they wanted to go digital, and they looked around the world, and somehow somebody told them about Creo, and they came, and that's who gave us the $12 million for 20 machines before we started the R&D on it. So it was an opportunity. And our first product was computer to plate. Well, first product was imaging engine. So up until then, if you wanted to make an offset, it's all about offset printing. If you wanted to make an offset plate, you had little imaging engines, and you made a bunch of things, and you put them on a table, and you masking tape them together, and then you put it on a plate, and then you process and expose it, and you process the plate. You process the film, and then you process the plate, and then it went to the presses. So we first made an imaging engine that would do all the film the size of a plate on one machine. And then the product we did for R. Donnelly was called Computer to Plate, where we wrote right on the plate with a laser. So we eliminated the film entirely and made the plates. And it's hard to fathom, but that saved the printers a lot of money, not just in material. But one printer I was talking to said every day you cut the cutoff time. So they had to make the film ahead and the plates, and that 3 or 4 days. He said, every time you cut a day off that, I make another $1 million, which I won't get into the economics, but it was kind of a surprise to me. So that took off. It really took off, the computer to plate. And then once you eliminate the film, though, you have no way to proof, because you made proofs from the film. So then we got into electronic proofing. We had a workflow. We had 200 software people working on workflow. We did everything for the printer except the presses. And we evolved into that. So that's our printing story. Now, Kodak, they were making film, and they could see the end coming. So they decided to start a new division. And so they bought 4 companies, and we were the last one. So being the last one, we held a lot of cards because they needed us to make the other 3 acquisitions make sense. So we sold to them. We tried to sell. We wanted to keep one of the businesses, but then there's another story. Our share price had tanked a lot, because we weren't making the plates, and our competitors both made then the computer to plates eventually, and the plates. So it's like the razor and razor blade. So they were giving away the damn plate makers to get a contract on the plates, and we couldn't do that. So we had dissidents hounding at our door trying to take over the company. So we ended up having to sell the whole company rather than keep a piece, which would have been a very nice business, and Kodak wasn't interested in it. So it never went anywhere.
Okay.
So we want to allow time for questions too.
Yeah, I was just going to literally finish off right here. Just
Okay.
one last question. That is, you're currently a very active philanthropist with your bunny, but also with incredible amount of time. And that's the universities, UBC, SFU, Science World, and Social Venture Partners. And then I know you're involved in some stuff in Central America. And you're very active, both money and time. And why is this so important to you and Judy?
I get asked that a lot. I don't know the answer. My family, they grew up poor during the Depression, and they were always worried there'd be another depression. They never gave anything to charity my whole life. And then at one point I thought, well, I got more money than I need. And I got more money than my kids need, because I don't believe in big inheritances. And they're on side with that. They're doing okay. So what am I going to do with my money? So my model, which didn't really work completely, was to put money into startups, which is where I made my money, and then take the profits from that and give it to charity. So I got on boards of both charities and startups. However, the startups didn't do as well as I thought they would. I've done all right, but so I just decided, to become a philanthropist, and I won't get into that because we don't have time, but we have 3 pillars that we work on: education, environment, and the last one's a little harder to define, but it's making a transformational difference in individual lives. So we are now working a lot in the downtown east side, the center down there, and so on. And I enjoy it. I mean, you got to do something besides travel and cycle. I started a cycling team, which is Laurie's on, and a bunch of the people we just mentioned, Amos and so are on, but not Dan.
And it's referred to as the Geriatric Cycling Club. Is that what we're entitled?
Well, we call it. Well, that was just once. Yeah, yeah. We call ourselves the Tech Vets because almost all of us, not quite, are retired CEOs of tech companies.
So that concludes the formal part of it. So just turn it to you, Bill, and we can open it up to questions of those who want to ask Ken something specific that we didn't cover.
Yeah, we've got another 15 minutes or so, so please ask your questions.
I'll kick it off, Ken, with a question. Well, actually, it's two questions. One's a kind of a statement of fact. I don't know if everybody appreciates how much Creo impacted the printing industry, but I know personally, having worked in the paper manufacturing sector, when you went direct to plate, that impacted the paper business big time. We had to reformulate our process and machines and create new paper just to use that process.
It was a different kind of plate, yeah.
Yeah. But the other question I had was, I've often heard with MDA, do the satellite imaging systems and Google Maps we see today, was that born out of MDA's technology?
Well, certainly, you know, the thing we were doing when I was at MDA was Landsat, the satellites that circle the Earth and take pictures in different seasons, and RadarSat, which was a Canadian initiative. The radar satellites were put up by the Canadian government, and we did all the ground stations and pretty well had a lock on that market. So after that, after I left, they got into all kinds of other things, but I haven't. Most of my friends came to Creo. I lost contact with MDA.
I know you're awfully involved up on SFU with the business program there. Can you share a few thoughts about that, Ken?
Yeah, well, I sponsored two programs. One at SFU and one at UBC, and while they're similar, they're quite different. But having both an engineering degree and an MBA, I fund programs, is the word I'm looking for, where they're forced to work together. So both of them have to, well, let's take the UBC one, and that's the one I started with. So there's a course, which I didn't start. Peter Lawrence started, which you guys probably know. Maybe not, maybe he came after you. And they have half business students and half engineering students in a course, and they get guest lecturers. But their project has to be to build a prototype that works with IP and write a business plan. I did a couple of things there. I funded a lab because they had no place to test their prototype. So UBC gave us a room, and I bought the oscilloscopes and stuff, and I still fund it. Each team gets a bit of the money for parts, and some want to travel and go to customers and stuff. Yeah. So it forces them to work together. They morphed it a bit because they found there's not enough for the business to do. So now I think it's 4 engineers and 2 business students in a team. And it's called New Venture Design. At SFU, people are taking a course and building stuff. I'm not sure they have to write a business plan. I think so. But again, it's a focus on business and engineering getting together. Instead of throwing, you know, the old story is the engineers made it and threw it over the wall to marketing to sell it. And there's still a lot of aminosity. I ran into somebody the other day who was a marketing guy swearing at the engineers. But anyway, so that's my main focus with the universities.
Brian Hodges has a question. Brian, just unmute yourself.
Oh, there's Brian.
Hi, Ken. Good to see you.
Are you this year?
I am. Yes, this is me.
I know Brian well. He used to beat me at squash every week soundly.
I tried. Just coming back to your philanthropic work, Ken, I know you've been involved with Science World for quite a while. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on the future now that we see some cracks appearing in the financing there.
Well, I just, heard about that today. The new CEO and I are supposed to have coffee next week, but, it's challenging time when your daily intake of people goes from 1,000 to 30, which is what they had last week. And the aquariums suffered the same way. So, it's all pandemic related. But I'm sure they'll come through it, but they're losing a lot of money right now because they don't have any customers. Donations generally have dried up because people are hanging on to their money, seeing what the market's going to do.
Yeah, I can imagine what that coffee conversation is going to be about next week. Looking for some donations.
Oh, I'm sure it'll come up.
Bill, you must have a question. Spilch.
Obviously, Creo is a tremendous success story for BC industry due to Ken and the people that he was associated with. But what does he see for the future? Is there potential for another company to rise up and get created that would be an equal or even larger? Ballard was another startup that had aspirations, did well for a while, but has sort of fizzled out in terms of where they've gone. So what does Ken see for the future for BC industry and high tech?
Well, I'm out of it because I quit all my boards a couple of years ago to focus, or 3 years ago to focus on philanthropy. But it's a good question, because why aren't there more? There's a lot of small companies, but there's no really big companies in BC. I can't. Laurie would know how big. I don't remember how big or how big Hootsuite is, but it's easy to get $1 billion valuation now. But to have 4,000 employees is a different thing. I mean, I missed the whole thing in Korea. We bought a company with 3,000 employees, a competitor. So we ended up with, and we had 1,500, and then through attrition and stuff, we went down to 4,000. But it was a big company, and we don't see those, and I don't know why. People say there's not enough angel investing. Well, the venture capitalists have killed the angel market, because if you invest early stage in a company now, as an angel, the venture capitalists come along and, excuse the expression, kick the shit out of you. They just devalue your shares with various means. So a lot of us have stopped angel investing. And other people say there's not enough venture capital, but there seems to be a lot of venture capitalists looking for good deals. So I don't know. Laurie's more into it. He's been running and investing in companies. You want to comment, Laurie?
Yeah, I agree with you. The fact it is, companies seem to want to sell early, and means Hootsuite has gone through its problems. There's certainly over 1,000 people, but it becomes a more of a challenging market getting big US VCs to put money into the Vancouver ecosystem, and we lack the sales and marketing talent. So it's a challenge we have. Hopefully we'll overcome that. But there's a few businesses that are really prospering, and shareholders are still doing all right. But as Ken said, the angel market's becoming a little bit it's more challenging now if you get the VCs in place and they put crippling terms that the early investors.
Well, it's been very informative and a great session, Ken and Laurie. I really appreciate you coming to our table and participating with our group. It's we can't help but feel a part of it, being from that demographic. So I want to thank you profusely for coming.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you.